Welcome to Communication 1. This is block week 1. You will have another block week in term 2. So feel welcome. For term 1, we are covering 5 topics. Now, I'm going into this because in our second session, which will be in seminar room 2, I will go through the administrative points that I need to discuss with you. Okay, so we're going to start off. In communication, term 1, we focus on 5 topics, right? You have all the slides with you. If you printed it out, fantastic. So you can just make notes next to it. The first topic that we are going to focus on is communication theory, right? The second one is intercultural communication. The third one, organizational communication. Then we go over to group dynamics, and we end off with reading for academic purposes. Right. Now, when we discuss a topic, we first look at questions that we need to be able to answer by the end of that topic. Right. So the questions for communication theory that we need to be able to answer is, firstly, what makes effective communication the lifeblood of the business world? Right. Effective communication, there is a distinct difference between efficient communication and effective communication. Does one person care to give us a difference between the two? What is efficient communication as opposed to effective communication? Efficient and effective. Yes, at the back. Within a certain span of time, yes. And effective communication is when you are successful in bringing your message across, right? You are being effective. So what makes effective communication the lifeblood of the business world? And remember, communication for this year, first year, is all about how do we communicate within a company setting, within an organization, within business. So the second question that we need to be able to answer is, what elements are common to all forms of communication? Communication does not only happen on campus or at home or in the business world, but it happens in all spheres of life. And there are certain elements that are common that you'll find in every sphere. And we are going to look at those elements. The third question that comes up is, what are the most important models of communication? We are going to look at the 5 or 6 models of communication that you need to know for the assessment purposes. And why do we need to know these important models of communication? Remember, a model is something that you use, theorists or researchers use, to analyze, interpret, or evaluate a certain context. And we are going to look at what important models of communication is being used. Right. Then when we communicate, there's always something that hinders us from getting our message across, or that hampers the communication process, and we will therefore look at what are these barriers to communication, right? Now, as a start, we need to be able to distinguish between communication theory and communication. Those are 2 different things. Communication theory, for those of you who read through the book, communication theory is the study of the transmission process, the transmission of information, thoughts, or feelings. Whereas communication is when the message is being transmitted. So you need to make that distinction. Communication theory is the study of information, thoughts, or feelings, and communication in itself is just the transmission of information, thoughts, and feelings. Right. We also get verbal and non-verbal communication. Right. Verbal communication is communication that is where you use your voice. It's spoken communication. And non-verbal communication, what would that be? She says text messages. Would that be regarded as, because remember text messages is written communication. So shall we say that non-verbal communication is also written communication? Yes. According to the book, yes. But I have a problem with that because I saw that verbal is written as well. But according to me, verbal is unwritten. Non-verbal is unwritten and unspoken. So what is non-verbal according to the book? They have 5 or 6 examples of non-verbal. So can you give those examples? Facial expressions. I'm communicating through my facial expression. Hand gestures, yes. What else? Body language. And what am I doing now? Signs. Right. What else can you think of that's non-verbal? You're not using words, but you're using your body to express yourself. Say again? Posture. Yes, your posture. Right. So now we go over to the models of communication. And as I said, we have 6 models. You need to know the definition of each one of these models. And in the book, they give you the definition of the model, as well as the advantages and disadvantages of each model. Right. So what is a model first and foremost? A model is just a framework that we use. It's a framework that we use to analyze, evaluate, or interpret a certain context of communication. Right. So in the book, we have firstly Laswell's model. Laswell's model is the more linear model. And Laswell's model was developed in 1945. And what it says is that communication, the communication process, is a one-way process. There's a sender, there's a message, and there's a receiver at the end. Is that how communication works? Yes, no? Is that how it works? So there's a sender, a message, and a receiver at the end. It's a one-way. There's no person there on the other side communicating back to you. Is that what you're saying? Think about it. Laswell says communication is a linear process. Linear, from this point to that point. Right. Next, Shannon and Weaver built on Laswell's model. And Shannon and Weaver says that communication is not linear. It's linear complex. Right. You need to take certain things into consideration. Those who read through the book, what do they take into consideration here? Noise. And what is noise? Depends on how you're sending the message, but what is the noise that we need to take into account? Something that affects the message, such as, we need to give a practical example. Static noise, noise coming from outside, what else? A bad signal, he says. What are the kind of noise that we need to take into account when we communicate with another person? Because this is what Shannon and Weaver is trying to tell us, that when you communicate, it's not a linear process, but we need to take into account the various noise factors that also comes into play. But it's still linear, right? Berlow's model, also still linear. But what does Berlow take into account apart from noise? Yes, at the back? Sender, there is a sender. There is a receiver. In between, there is a channel through which the message goes. And it includes also the noise, right? So now we are done with Berlow's model. We go over to a model that I think explains the communication process a bit more as it is happening. And I think this model we can really rely on when we want to analyze, evaluate, and interpret. So the transactional model says communication is not a linear process, but it is a transaction between two people, right? or between yourself and another context, or between two contexts. So transactional model says there is a sender, there is a message, there is a channel, a receiver, but there's also feedback. So we are in a transaction, right? Not linear. Linear says it's only a sender, channel, message, and a receiver. That person does not communicate back to you. And that is not communication. Transactional says communication is a transaction between two people. The interactive model builds on the transactional model. And with the interactive model, we also have feedback and noise taken into account, right? Then we end off with Osgood and Scrum's model. Who read up on Osgood and Scrum's model? What is the difference here that they bring in? Circular model. It's a circular model. And what do they include that the others don't? They imply that communication is a never-ending process, just like the transactional. It's a never-ending process, right? Communication between two contexts or two situations or two individuals is a never-ending process, right? Here are your 5 models. You need to know the definition. You need to be able to tell us what the advantages are and the disadvantages are. I've not touched on the advantages or the disadvantages, but that you need to go to your book for, okay? When you do your self-study. And here we just have it in this form, just to tell us where it all started. Now remember, the theorists started with the communication theories. They started with a simple linear model. They saw that, okay, we can add, we can expand this model. We go over to the complex linear model. We're saying that we need to include noise. Transactional model is saying that communication is definitely not linear, but it's a transaction between two people. And then the interactive model, as well as Osgood and Scrum's model, says that communication is something that is never ending, right? Now, in the workplace, or at home, or in your church, any other denomination, there is different types of communication. There's about 7 types of communication that we need to be aware of, right? The first type of communication, and it's on page 72 to 73, is extrapersonal communication. Extrapersonal communication is communication that takes place between a person and something or an object that cannot communicate back, right? So, for instance, you left your home this morning. You left home, you locked the door, and while locking the door, you hurt your finger somehow, and you said, ouch! You were communicating with something that cannot communicate back. The dog is barking outside, and you're telling the dog, keep quiet. Can the dog say something back? No. So extrapersonal communication is when you communicate with something that cannot communicate back. Okay, extrapersonal. Just remember that. Intrapersonal. Intrapersonal communication is communication that happens where? When you speak to yourself. Do you use words when you speak to yourself? Sometimes. But most of the time we have thoughts. We worry about something, we are anxious, we're thinking about what we're going to do after this lecture, or we're thinking about what happened this morning before we came here. We're thinking about how are we going to remember all of this for next week's test. That is interpersonal communication, and many a times the other person or the people next to you are not aware of what you're thinking. But that is what we call intrapersonal communication. It's cognitive noise, kind of. So we had intra, now we have interpersonal communication. Who can tell me what is interpersonal communication?
Communication between two.
Yes, or between yourself and a large crowd. When you actually use your voice to communicate. So that is interpersonal communication, is what we do on a daily basis, right? At home, in your business, anywhere else. Another type of communication is mass media. Mass media is communication that takes place through which channels or through which mediums. When you communicate with the masses, how would you communicate with the masses of South Africa? Through television, yes, or the radio, or how else? Newspaper. So those are mass media sources. Right, social media is also a type of communication. Social media, we are all aware of that. Some or not, some of us, or maybe all of us, are on a social media platform. That would include Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, what else? Instagram. Those are all platforms that we use to communicate. Right. Then we also have small group communication. It's communication that takes place within a small group. And the number of people involved in that group is 3 to 12 people. Less than 3, it's not a small group. More than 12, it's not a small group anymore. Okay. Intercultural communication is a communication that takes place between 2 different cultures, either locally or internationally, right? When you are in your business, you need to communicate with different cultures. Your colleagues are from a different culture. In South Africa, we have a lot of different cultures. But also when we do business with people internationally in China or in Dubai, we also have to take into consideration the cultural factors, right? So that also counts as intercultural communication, right? And people often get confused with public communication and mass media. Who can tell me what the difference is between the two? Public communication. A speech given by whom and to who? A political leader. Where would that be? In a public place, right? So there's no restriction. It's like a public speech given to the public. There's no restriction as to who can come to this speech. Right, so that is the types of communication. We have 2, 4, 6, 8 types of communication. You need to be able to identify it. You need to be able to define it and give us examples of each, right? This will be in your test, so please make a note of that. Right, now please do not get confused with types of communication and modes of communication. Right, we have 3 kind of modes of communication that we touch on briefly here. And the first mode of communication is formal communication. Where does formal communication normally happen? Business, workplace, only there? Do you formally communicate or informally communicate with your lecturer or with your pastor at church, or do you only formally communicate in your workplace? Where else? Family meetings. Some serious family meetings. Formal communication is either written or spoken, right? When it's written, we make use of emails or letters, right? When we formally communicate, and we use a different kind of language when we communicate. Informal communication happens at home when you talk to your sister or your brother or your mother, because you don't go home and then you tell your mother or your father, you announce the fact that you just came in and you said, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen." That is not the way to go, right? Because then you will be using formal terms in an informal context, right? So please make sure that you know what the difference is between formal and informal, right? Verbal and non-verbal communication, as we said earlier, one is spoken and the other one is only using your body language, signs, gestures, and facial expressions. Right, page 43. The book gives very, very good explanations of all of these points. So please do not only rely on the slides that I handed out to you. It was put on Blackboard. You cannot rely on the slides when you study for your test. You need to have your slides with you, your book next to your slides, and you need to make notes of all of the definitions. That is the only way. Right. Under communication theory, we lastly look at the barriers to communication, and this is where we'll spend a bit more time at. There are certain barriers to communication that we need to take into account, right? Barriers to communication is, first of all, the noise that we spoke about earlier. Noise is factors that inhibit or hamper the communication process. And you get three types of noise. You get physical noise, psychological noise, and physiological noise. Physical noise is a kind of noise that if we are now in this lecture hall, some students will come down the passage protesting, they're making a noise, and we are unable to proceed with our lecture here. Another example of physical noise is a child crying while you are on the phone. That is physical noise, right? What other kind of noise can you think about? Yes, at the back? Yes, but is it really noise? Is it? That sound is coming between the two of us now. You can't hear me. Yes. So, physical noise is any noise that you hear outside. The traffic is also very noisy. Sometimes you're trying to speak over the phone with someone, and you can't hear the person because your partner wants to play loud music in the car, and that is also physical noise, right? Another type of noise is psychological noise. Psychological noise is noise that happens in your mind. And psychological noise is also noise that other people are not aware of. So you might be worrying or thinking about something else, or you might be anxious about this afternoon's or next week's text, as I said. You might be disappointed in what someone said to you this morning, and your mind just can't seem to focus on this lecture because your mind is still there. That is psychological noise. Other psychological noise is really when you have stress, there's worries, problems, emotional problems, and all of that. Psychological noise, it comes between yourself and whatever message that you need to hear in that context. But it normally does not fit into the context that you find yourself in, right? Physiological noise is when you go into a room and you come in, for instance, in this lecture hall with a leg that's got it's very painful. Your leg is aching, or you have a toothache, or you have a headache, and you cannot focus, you cannot listen to the lecture, and that would be regarded as physiological noise. Any barrier that you find on your body. Okay, so physical noise is noise that you can hear outside. Psychological noise is anything that happens in your mind. And physiological noise is when you have a pain in your body that's hampering your communication process. Right. Interpersonal noise is also, it's got to do, and we're going to elaborate on the psychological noise. Right. The psychological noise has different aspects. First of all, when you make a faulty assumption about a person or a context. And why do we make assumptions? Or what is an assumption? An assumption is when you form an opinion about someone or something before you even engage with that particular individual, right? So when you make an assumption, that can also cause you to not talk to this person because she looks like someone who I've already dealt with in a very negative way. So that is a faulty assumption. She's not like that person, but just because she looks like that person, I will not engage her. Okay, that is a faulty assumption. It can be a barrier to communication. Perception. How can perception be a barrier to communication? When you, and I normally say, one what you consume becomes the filter through which you view your reality. Your perception is normally based by the things you take in, right? Or by your background. So whatever you take in, the books you read, the videos you watch, the radio you listen to, all of those becomes part of how you form your perception of a certain person or certain situation, right? So if I have a different perception about communication than C has, then the two of us won't really see eye to eye because our perception clashes, right? And stereotypes also falls into that. What is a stereotype? When are you displaying stereotypical behavior? Communication is a module that is very interactive. We need to communicate with each other. So what is a stereotype? All of you have heard of it. You know exactly what it is. Yes? Based on assumptions, you make a decision about a person or a context or situation, right? And that would be the deciding factor. Will I go and communicate or talk to this person? Will I have a conversation with him? It does not look like the type that falls into my category, right? So that is when you make a stereotypical assumption. Mindset. All of us here, we are 30, 40 people. We have different mindsets. Now, it's not a negative thing when you have a different mindset. But people with two completely opposite mindsets, do they normally get, how can I say, will they gel well? No, they won't. Because if I have a different mindset, my mindset, I'm a very easy person. I don't like to do a lot. I'm laid back when it comes to an assignment, I'm very laid back. I do what I must. I'm not here to outwork anybody. I just want to do the minimal. And then the next person is a very hardworking person. He needs to outwork the rest of the people, the students, and he needs to get that 80%. You've got this person laid back, just wants to pass, this person very serious. They have two different mindsets when it comes to the assignment. So when they communicate with each other, will there be a common understanding? Definitely not. So that would be a barrier to communication. The rest of the 3 points, frame of reference, backgrounds, and inferences, falls into those 4. And I need you to go and read up on it in the book. Okay. Interpersonal barriers to communication. What is interpersonal again? When you communicate with? Say again? With one another. Right. So there's barriers that can come into play when we communicate with one another. First of all, vocabulary. How can vocabulary be a barrier when we communicate? Yes. Yes. Or there's certain words that you don't understand that I'm using right now. Then what would happen? We can't go into depth with that conversation, yes. Non-verbal and verbal mismatches. This is an interesting one. Non-verbal and verbal mismatches. There's not a match between the two. How is this a barrier to communication? When someone gets a promotion at work, as the explanation in the example in the book, someone gets a promotion at work. And you are not really happy for this person, but you need to congratulate him. Then you go over to the person and say, congratulations on your promotion. I really think you deserve it. But your facial expression does not tell that person that you are actually happy for him or her. So that is a mismatch, and that would be a barrier to communication, right? Excessive emotion. When you try to talk to someone, that person gets extremely angry. Do you also get angry? And if you do, that would also be a barrier, right? You are speaking to your husband. Your husband decides that he's just going to display a lot of anger now in order to just, finish this whole argument. What do you do as a lady? You keep quiet. You're thinking of ways how to calm him down, right? So excessive emotion also hampers the communication, because whatever was the issue that we started with is no longer the issue. We need to think of how we need to calm you down. So that is also a barrier to communication. We're not reaching the end that we wanted to. Selective attention. Selective attention is when you come into a lecture hall, for instance, and you know that in the test we are only going to do the 3 kinds of noise. You know for a fact the rest does not matter. So you only listen to the 3 kinds of noise, and then for the rest, you think about how you can actually write that in your test. You are not paying any attention to the rest of the points. So that is selective attention. What other examples can you think of in other contexts that we apply this? Yes. You only pay attention to stuff that you are interested in, such as, we like practical examples here. Yes, if your child is annoying you and telling you about something that happened at school, what do? How do you go about that? But you're not really listening. You're focused on something else. Right? That is selective attention. You just want to know, did you do your homework? And that is it. You don't want to know everything else. Right? Cultural variations. How can that be a barrier to communication when there's 2 different cultures? How can it be a barrier? Language. What else? Punctuality. What else? Eye contact. That is where cultures differ. Right? Eye contact, punctuality, language, and other factors. We are going to look at cultural variations and cultural communication in depth in our second session now. But that would be barriers to communication. Up until organizational barriers, and this is the last barrier. And the first organizational barrier, this is now the barriers that you will find in a company, is the first one listed in the book is Chinese whispers. Who's heard of the broken telephone? Broken telephone? Yes, you've heard of it. Can you kindly tell us what is that? What is a broken telephone? It's when you?
Basically relaying a message, but then also the communication between the partners and the participants.
Yes. Exactly. All of you heard him? When you relay a message, I tell her to whisper something in her ear. Up until that point, the message should go. But when I ask him, what did I tell her? He does not give the correct message back. Information overload in a business. When you are, for instance, an intern at a business, you need to go to courses. You need to attend workshops. And all of these things, you're new at the company. It's information overload. It's a 2-hour workshop. You need to retain all the information. That can also be a barrier, because now at the end of the day, you retain nothing. And you feel like you cannot really apply the knowledge. Right? So information overload is an organizational barrier. Lack of knowledge. When someone does not know something on a particular topic that's being discussed in a business meeting, you cannot really give input, right? So that causes a barrier. Stressful environments and unrealistic deadlines. And the boss tells you, listen, you need to hand in a 15-page feedback on the workshop that you've attended on Tuesday. It's Friday today. You need to hand it in on Monday. Is that a realistic deadline? No, because that is the only instruction that he's giving. I do not know the details of what he wants me to write, so that can cause problems between the 2 of us. Right, that is organizational barriers. And we need to move over to our second venue by 9:45, and then we'll continue there. So 9:45 till 10 o'clock, that would be considered as your break. Is that fine? Okay. Now, when we go to the next venue, we will discuss the following. Right, we are done with communication theory. we're moving over to organizational communication. And once again, we have questions that we need to be able to answer. Can you remember the questions that we put up at the start of communication theory? What are the elements? What are the models? What are the barriers? And can we answer those now? Yes. So the questions for organizational communication is, firstly, what is an organization? Right, the definition you need to know. Secondly, what is organizational communication? Is it different to normal communication between two people? Right. The third question that we will look at is, what are the different types of organizational communication? Remember, we just listed 8 types under communication theory. Will it be the same in organizational, or is it different? Right. Then we need to distinguish between the climate in an organization as well as the culture. What is the climate like in an organization, and what is the culture like, and how does it impact communication? And then lastly, what we will look at is, what are the leadership styles in an organizational hierarchy? Right. So first and foremost, what is an organization? For this lecture, and I know this is your first lecture, and you'll have another lecture in the 2nd week of May. Right. So what we're doing today is we're actually just combining the entire term once lectures in one day. So for this lecture, you should have read up on the entire term's work. You had it. I did not upload it for you weekly. I gave everything to you the first week, right? You have all the slides, and you have the subject guide. The subject guide includes all your topics. So as a communication student, you look at the date, and you look at which topics are we discussing this week, and you make sure that you read through those topics within that week. You should have been doing that up until this point, right? So you are not unaware of the definition of an organization, which is why I'm asking, what is an organization? If somebody else could answer for a change. Yes? He says it's a group of people. It's a group of people who wants to achieve a common goal. Right? Do we agree with him? Yes. A group of people who wants to achieve a common goal. What is the difference between a goal and a common goal? You have a goal, but you also have a common goal. There is a distinct difference. All of us have goals, right? When it comes to our family life, our career, our personal life, our finances, we have goals that we need to reach. What is a common goal? A common goal is when more than one person wants to achieve that. And within an organization, who comes up with a common goal? Is it the CEO or the founder of the company? Or is it all of the employees that starts out with the company? Who comes up with a common goal? The executive of the company. Is it only him? He says, this is our list of goals. Can you please go to page 4? We have 10 goals for this company. Read through it, make sure that we reach those goals. Is that how it happens? Yes. All the people agree on the goals. Do they review the goals yearly, quarterly, bi-weekly? Some companies do, others don't, right? Your goals need to be reviewed periodically. So as you said, yes, an organization is a group of people who are working towards a common goal, right? We have 2 minutes left. And in an organization, you get internal communication. It's communication that happens within the organization. We also get external communication. Now the internal communication is amongst who? It's amongst employees and employee and manager, employee and supervisor. That is the internal communication, right? It can either be formal or informal. We're going to look at both. External communication within an organization is communication that happens with outside people, which can be either shareholders, clients, customers, who else? Say again? Yeah, all stakeholders, investors, thank you. So we have internal communication within an organization as well as external communication, right? And I think we are going to, there goes my alarm, we are going to stop there and move over to seminar room 2. Okay? Does any one of you know where